Diane Stoddy never looked like the kind of woman people warned their children about. She was quiet, churchgoing, the sort of mother who baked cookies for school events and sat in the same pew every Sunday. In the small Missouri town where everyone knew everyone else, Diane blended into the background of ordinary life so well that no one ever thought to look closely. She had been married to Mark Stoddy for decades. Mark was a factory worker, dependable, predictable, and tired in the way men get tired when life never quite turns into what they hoped. They had children together, Rachel, their oldest daughter, sharp-eyed and reserved, and Sarah, younger, gentler, and still trusting in ways that would later almost cost her everything. Their son Sean lived at home as well, struggling to find direction, but loved in the way families love even when they don't fully understand each other. From the outside, it was a normal family. From the inside, something had already gone terribly wrong. Money had always been a quiet tension in the Stoddy household, not explosive fights or dramatic shouting matches, just a constant suffocating pressure. Bills, credit cards, insurance policies taken out just in case. Diane handled most of the paperwork. She liked knowing where everything was, liked control, liked certainty. And slowly, almost invisibly, insurance stopped being a safety net. It became a plan. It began with Mark. In early 2012, Diane told friends that her husband wasn't feeling well. He had stomach issues, she said, fatigue, nausea, things that sounded ordinary enough to dismiss. Mark himself didn't complain much. He trusted his wife, trusted that when she handed him a drink or food or medicine, it was meant to help. What he didn't know was that antifreeze, sweet-tasting, colorless, deadly, had begun to find its way into his body. The poison didn't kill quickly. It attacked slowly, silently, destroying organs while mimicking natural illness. By the time Mark was hospitalized, doctors were confused. His symptoms didn't make sense. His condition worsened rapidly. Diane stayed by his bedside, calm and grieving, holding his hand while his body shut down from the inside. When Mark Stoddy died, the town mourned. No one suspected a thing. Insurance money followed, not enough to raise eyebrows, but enough to reinforce an idea already forming in Diane's mind. Death could look natural. Death could pay. And death, she realized, didn't have to stop with her husband. Her son Sean was next. Sean had been struggling, emotionally, financially, socially. He relied on his mother, trusted her completely. When Diane began giving him drinks, encouraging him to eat certain foods, he never questioned it. Why would he? She was his mother. Within weeks, Sean fell violently ill, vomiting, pain, weakness so severe he could barely stand. Doctors again were puzzled. His tests came back inconclusive. His condition declined at a terrifying pace. Rachel watched this unfold from inside the house. Rachel had always been closer to her mother than the others. She listened, observed, learned, and over time, Diane began sharing pieces of her thinking with Rachel, complaints about money, about responsibility, about how unfair life had been to them. What started as conversations turned darker. Rachel didn't stop her. She helped her. When Sean died in March 2012, the grief was overwhelming, but again, no alarm sounded. Another insurance payout followed. 2 deaths in one family were tragic, yes, but still believable, except for one person, Sarah. Sarah was younger, softer, and deeply unsettled by how quickly her family was disappearing. She noticed things others didn't, conversations that stopped when she entered the room, drinks her mother insisted she finish, Rachel watching her too closely. One evening, Diane handed Sarah a beverage and stood nearby, watching. Sarah hesitated. Something felt wrong. She drank it anyway. Within hours, Sarah collapsed. She was rushed to the hospital, her body already failing. Antifreeze poisoning had pushed her organs toward shutdown. Doctors placed her in a coma. For days, she hovered between the hospital room that had once felt like a place of quiet mourning, turned into something else entirely, a crime scene. When Sarah told doctors what she had overheard, there was an immediate shift in how everyone looked at Diane Stott. Nurses who had comforted her now watched her carefully. Doctors who had trusted her accounts of symptoms began questioning everything she had said. Blood tests confirmed what Sarah feared. Antifreeze. Not a trace, not contamination. A lethal dose. Police were contacted that same day. Detectives arrived quietly, not wanting to alarm Diane or Rachel. They began by asking simple questions: how long Sarah had been sick, what she had eaten or drunk, who had been with her. Diane answered calmly, too calmly. She cried when appropriate, paused when sympathy was expected, but to trained eyes, something was off. Her grief didn't fluctuate, it didn't break, it sat on her face like a mask. Rachel, on the other hand, was tense. She avoided eye contact. Her answers were short, clipped. When detectives mentioned insurance policies, her hands tightened in her lap. Investigators pulled records. What they found was staggering. Insurance policies had been taken out on Mark, Sean, and Sarah, each shortly before they became ill. The beneficiaries were Diane and Rachel. Suddenly, the deaths that once seemed tragic looked deliberate. Police exhumed Mark and Sean's bodies. The results erased all doubt. Antifreeze poisoning. The same toxin, the same slow, painful process. 2 deaths that had been ruled natural were now officially murders. Diane and Rachel were taken in for questioning separately. Diane went first. She sat across from detectives, hands folded, posture straight. When told what the autopsies revealed, she didn't gasp, didn't cry. She simply nodded, almost as if she already knew. She admitted to poisoning Mark. She admitted to poisoning Sean. Her explanation was chilling in its simplicity. She said life had become unbearable, that her family was a burden, that the money would solve everything, that God would forgive her. She spoke as if she were discussing chores. When asked about Sarah, Diane hesitated for the first time. She wasn't supposed to wake up, she said quietly. That sentence would echo through the courtroom months later. Rachel's interrogation was different. At first, she denied everything, claimed ignorance, said she trusted her mother. But detectives presented evidence: text messages, financial discussions, overheard conversations. Slowly, Rachel's resistance cracked. She admitted she knew. She admitted she helped. She admitted she did nothing to stop it. Rachel told investigators that her mother had brought her into the plan gradually, that it started with complaints, then justifications, then certainty. Diane had convinced her that it was necessary, that it was practical, that it was inevitable. Rachel didn't poison anyone herself, but she watched, and she stayed silent, and in the eyes of the law, that made her complicit. The town was stunned. Church members couldn't reconcile the woman they prayed beside with the crimes she confessed to. Friends replayed every interaction, searching for signs they had missed. Sarah, meanwhile, was learning to live again. Her kidneys were damaged, her body weakened. The betrayal cut deeper than the poison ever had. The woman who gave her life had nearly taken it. The sister she trusted had stood by and allowed it. Survivor's guilt haunted her. Why had she lived when her father and brother had not? Why had she been spared? Court proceedings began months later, and the media descended. Headlines labeled Diane a family annihilator. Rachel was called the daughter who knew. In court, Diane showed no emotion as details were read aloud, no tears when photographs were shown, no visible reaction when Sarah testified. Sarah's voice shook as she described waking up in the hospital, hearing her own death discussed as a financial event, realizing that the people closest to her had decided she was expendable. After the sentencing, the courtroom emptied slowly, as if no one wanted to be the first to step back into a world where something like this could happen. Diane Stouty was led away in handcuffs. She did not look back. She did not search for Sarah's face. Her expression was calm, almost relieved, as though a long, exhausting project had finally come to an end. Rachel followed behind her. Unlike her mother, Rachel hesitated at the door. For a brief moment, she turned her head and looked toward the gallery, toward Sarah. Their eyes met. Sarah later said that moment stayed with her longer than any testimony or evidence, not because of hatred, but because of emptiness. Rachel didn't look angry or afraid or remorseful. She looked hollow. Prison life stripped Diane of everything she once controlled. No paperwork, no finances, no family schedules to manage. Her days became rigid, predictable, imposed by others. Yet even behind bars, Diane did not crumble. Psychologists who evaluated her described a woman with extreme emotional detachment. She spoke of her family as if they were objects in a system that had failed. She referred to the murders as decisions rather than crimes. In her mind, she had not acted out of cruelty. She had acted out of logic. Rachel's experience was different. In prison, the reality of what she had allowed began to settle in, away from her mother's influence, without the constant reinforcement of justifications. The weight of complicity pressed down on her. She struggled with depression, with panic, with guilt that came in waves so intense they left her unable to sleep. Other inmates learned quickly why she was there. Some despised her for helping kill family. Others feared her for the same reason. Rachel withdrew, spending long hours alone, replaying moments she wished she could undo. The drinks she watched being poured, the conversations she didn't interrupt, the silence she chose because it was easier than confrontation. She hadn't killed with her hands, but she had killed with her obedience. Sarah, meanwhile, faced a different kind of sentence: freedom. Doctors told her she would live, but never the same way. Her kidneys would always be fragile. Fatigue would follow her for years. Simple illnesses could become dangerous. But the physical damage was only part of it. Trust became almost impossible. When someone offered her a drink, her heart raced. When a loved one showed concern, she questioned their motives. Love no longer felt safe. It felt conditional. Therapy helped, slowly. So did speaking. Sarah began sharing her story publicly, not for attention, but because silence had nearly killed her. She spoke about listening to instincts, about questioning situations that feel wrong, even when the people involved are family, especially when they are family. The public reaction to the case lingered for years. True crime forums dissected Diane's psychology. Documentaries replayed the timeline again and again. People asked the same questions. How could a mother do this? How could a daughter help? Experts explained that greed alone was rarely the whole answer. Control, resentment, emotional detachment, and long-term dissatisfaction all played roles. Diane had seen her family not as people, but as obstacles, and eventually as assets. Rachel had been shaped by proximity, raised under the same roof, trained slowly to accept the unacceptable. And Sarah had been the variable Diane didn't account for, because Sarah listened, she noticed, and she survived. Years later, Sarah visited her father and brother's graves alone. She spoke to them quietly, apologizing for living, promising to live well, promising not to let their deaths be reduced to headlines or lessons in pathology. She left flowers, not for Diane, not for Rachel, only for the people who never knew what was happening to them. In interviews, Sarah was once asked if she hated her mother. She paused for a long time before answering. "Hate takes too much energy," she said. "I don't give her that anymore." The time does strange things after a tragedy. For the outside world, it moves on quickly. New headlines replace old ones. New stories push past the last. But for the people trapped inside the aftermath, time stretches. It thickens. Every day feels longer than the one before. For Diane Stott, prison time settled into routine with unsettling ease. She woke when the lights came on, ate when food was served, walked when told. The loss of freedom did not appear to disturb her the way it did others. Psychologists later noted that people who rely heavily on control often adapt well to rigid systems, because someone else now carries the burden of decision-making. In letters she wrote early in her sentence, Diane never used the words murder or poison. She called her actions mistakes. She framed the deaths as outcomes rather than choices. When chaplains asked her to reflect on repentance, she spoke about forgiveness she expected to receive, not forgiveness she owed. Rachel, in contrast, unraveled slowly. Without Diane nearby, memories resurfaced, ones she had pushed aside for years. Childhood moments she once considered normal now appeared warped. Her mother's constant criticism, the way love felt earned, not given, how approval came only when Rachel agreed, obeyed, aligned. Rachel began to understand that the plot had not started with antifreeze. It had started long before, with conditioning. As a child, Rachel learned that conflict meant withdrawal, that disagreement led to emotional punishment, that loyalty was measured by silence. When Diane first mentioned the idea that money would solve everything, Rachel didn't hear it as a threat. She heard it as truth. Prison therapists tried to break through that conditioning. Some days Rachel resisted. Other days she sobbed uncontrollably, haunted by images of Sean vomiting, Mark fading, Sarah collapsing. The question that tortured her most was not why Diane did it. It was why she didn't stop it. Outside prison walls, Sarah was rebuilding a life she never planned to live. She moved away from her hometown, changed routines, chose anonymity over familiarity. The streets that once felt safe now felt like echoes of something poisoned. Relationships were difficult. When people asked about her family, she froze. Telling the truth felt heavy. Lying felt wrong. Eventually, she learned to say simply, "They're gone," and let the silence do the rest. Years of therapy helped Sarah name what had happened to her, not just attempted murder, but betrayal trauma, the kind that fractures the foundation of identity. When the people who shape your earliest understanding of love become your greatest threat, the world stops making sense. Healing, she learned, wasn't about forgetting. It was about integrating the truth without letting it define her entirely. She found strength in routine, in advocacy, in speaking to medical professionals about recognizing poisoning symptoms sooner, in reminding families that illness without explanation deserves deeper investigation. Sometimes she wondered what would have happened if she hadn't woken up. The thought still made her chest tighten. Public fascination with the case faded slowly, but questions lingered. Commentators debated whether Rachel deserved life sentences, whether Diane was evil or broken, whether the system failed by not detecting the earlier poisonings. But for Sarah, the answers didn't matter much anymore. What mattered was this: she had trusted her instincts at the last possible moment, and that trust saved her life. On anniversaries of the deaths, Sarah lit candles privately, one for her father, one for her brother, one for the life she almost lost. She did not light one for her mother or sister, not out of spite, but because mourning them felt like surrendering to a version of love that nearly killed her. Diane grew older in prison. Her hair grayed, her movement slowed. She received fewer letters each year. She rarely spoke about her family anymore, not because of... As years passed, the Stout case became something people referenced rather than remembered. A cautionary example in criminology lectures, a footnote in discussions about family annihilators and financial motive murders, a story summarized in headlines that could never fully capture the quiet horror of how it all unfolded. But for those who lived through it, the story never truly ended. Diane Stout aged behind concrete walls, her world shrinking to the size of routines and regulations. She rarely spoke about Mark or Sean anymore. When asked directly about them in later evaluations, she referred to them by name, not by relationship. Not my husband, not my son, just names. Psychologists noted that this linguistic distancing was not accidental. It was a defense, a way to preserve the version of herself she still believed in, the woman who had done what was necessary. Diane believed suffering had meaning only if it served purpose, and once that purpose was gone, so were the people attached to it. Rachel's internal battle, however, never stabilized. Some days she accepted her guilt fully, speaking in group therapy about how silence can be as deadly as action. Other days she minimized her role, clinging to the belief that she had been manipulated beyond her control. Both truths lived inside her, and they fought constantly. Nightmares plagued her, visions of glasses filled halfway, of her mother's voice calm and instructive, of Sarah lying motionless in a hospital bed. In these dreams, Rachel always tried to speak, and always failed. Sarah, on the outside, learned that survival did not mean closure. People often asked her if she had forgiven her mother and sister, as if forgiveness were a finish line, as if it were owed, as if withholding it made her bitter. But Sarah learned something important in therapy. Forgiveness is not a requirement for healing. Safety is. Boundaries are. Truth is. She chose peace without reconciliation. She chose distance without hatred. She chose life without explanation. Over time, Sarah built relationships slowly, carefully. She learned to test trust in small ways, accepting help, asking questions, listening to her own discomfort instead of dismissing it. She became the person she once needed. The case left behind difficult questions society still struggles to answer. Why do some people value life over money? How does manipulation within families go unnoticed for so long? Why are women, especially mothers, often excluded from suspicion even when patterns emerge? The answers are uncomfortable. Because evil does not always look monstrous. Sometimes it looks responsible. Sometimes it looks caring. Sometimes it pours you a drink and watches to make sure you finish it. The Stout family tragedy was not loud, it was not impulsive, it was methodical, patient, and deeply personal. And it nearly succeeded. Sarah often said that what haunted her most was not the poison, but the certainty with which it was given, the absence of doubt, the absence of hesitation, the realization that someone she loved had already decided she was expendable. That kind of knowledge changes a person forever, but it does not have to destroy them. In the final interview she ever gave about the case, Sarah spoke directly to listeners. She told them to trust patterns over promises, to listen when their body feels wrong before their mind understands why, to remember that love should never require silence, obedience, or sacrifice of self. because sometimes survival begins with a single thought: something isn't right, and sometimes that thought is enough to save a life.